purpose of this video is to give a brief tutorial on how to install and load Shaq's roster mods for 2K20. If you're anything like me, then over the last number of years, I've been really disappointed with 2K's just overall experience, particularly when it comes to historical rosters. So this tutorial is going to show you how you can download and install Shaq's rosters mod, which tends to make 2K a much better experience. I'll have links in the description to the different URLs you'll need to get to. I'm going to walk through it start to finish. We'll start with Shaq's roster page here. Here you'll read who's contributed for the mods for it, as well as this is where we'll download our files. And there's instructions you can follow here as well in case the video, you want some written instruction with the video as well. These are the number of mod packs we'll need to download. There's also a 2K hook and an additional folder we'll need. So first things first, we'll actually go ahead and start downloading these media mod packs. Once you open it up, it should take you to a download page like this. I made a folder, I just called it 2K20 roster files. You can save this wherever you want, save it to your desktop downloads folder. I tend to keep it all in one place, and I'm actually gonna move these a little bit later because I like to keep a backup of them just in case something happens to the download links. So again, you're just opening these like this. Try and save them all to the same location, just make it a little bit easier on yourself. We're gonna unpack these folders. I'm gonna speed this up. But basically you're gonna download all the mod packs. And then at the very bottom, you'll see this 2K hook and sync bin folder. Those will be the last files you need. The 2K hook folder is gonna take you here, and the download will be down here. You actually need to make an account to download this file. So as you can see, I have a download link. I'm signed in. If you weren't, then it would end up looking something like this, where you can see the hook file, but you can't download it. So make an account, it's free, sign in, download the hook file as well. Put that in the same location as your other folders that you're downloading. So you should see your folder structure looking a little bit like this. We're gonna unzip these folders. I use 7-zip. Really any sort of extraction tool will work. 7-zip, WinZip, whatever's most convenient for you. You could wait to extract all these, or you could extract them as they're downloading, whatever's easier. Once you've extracted, you can delete, or you could put that somewhere else to hold on to it for later. If you don't have 7-zip, you can just Google it here. I'll put a link in the description for this website, but it's pretty easy. Then just download the version you need for your system. This will allow you to extract the files. So I'm showing you a couple different folders now. Here's where I've been downloading the files. I actually unzipped the pack number 2. Again, you could unzip them as you're going along, or you could wait till the end and unzip them all. Really, it's your preference there. I would just make sure to wait till they're fully downloaded before you extract them. So you could wait till the very end and then do it. The second folder I have up here, if you go to your Steam Apps, Common, NBA 2K20, you're gonna put a lot of the files here. So I'd recommend having this folder up. And then in Steam, this is where our roster is gonna be. Steam user data. There's a string of numbers here, and then another string, and then the remote folder. And if you've been playing 2K, you should have some roster files in there, or My League, whatever you're playing. If not, this will be blank. I also put an Excel sheet in here for myself. This is how I keep track of the different rosters I have and what they're labeled. I'll explain this a little bit further, And I'll also have a download link for that Excel file in case you want to use it too, because it can be a little tricky to remember how things are labeled. So I'm going to go ahead and boot up 2K. If you look here, I have this roster 57, and I'll just kind of show you what's going on here. So I've booted up 2K. Every roster you make, it actually creates a file location here. So let's just say I'm making a new roster. You can see I already have Thunder Shaq's rosters in here. So it doesn't really matter which one I load. We're just going to make a new roster. We'll save it. It's not really going to matter what we name it. For every roster in here, that's creating a separate file in that folder. These ones that are labeled D, I do for draft classes. So here's our test. I'll go get out of 2K. Now, in that roster folder, you can see there's a new roster here, roster 58. How the naming works is there's 100 rosters and draft class spots available for 2K, and it just puts them there. So here's my file I use to track it, and what I do is I put the roster name for myself, and then what is it labeled in that other folder. So for test 2010, it's roster number 500057. And this is how I keep track of it, because you'll notice that they're not always going to be in order unless you're doing a clean install. I'll go in a little bit more detail for this later. One thing you could do if you wanted to, let's say your Thunder Shack updates this, adds more rosters, you could just copy that list and then kind of paste it into your table if you wanted. And then you could make sure you have the right roster spots. But really, you're going to need to make those rosters in 2K to create that save file, first of all. So I'm going to go ahead and unzip all of these. Should be a little bit quicker if you wait for them to finish downloading. So I'm just going to clear that out. And I actually need to add a couple roster spots for mine because I haven't downloaded the mods since these rosters have been added. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go into 2K, make a new roster. It doesn't really matter. I'm actually I want to delete that roster. So you could do it a couple different ways. I'm just going to do it from here, but you could delete it from within 2K as well. But this will get rid of that test roster that I made. And I need 4 from 86 to 90, and there we go. So I'm going to need to make 5 rosters there. So this is how you would do it to kind of prep the roster. If you're doing it from scratch, I'll show you how it'd be a little bit easier. But if you have an existing account, you probably already have, and there's the test, so I'm going to delete that. You probably already have files in here. So I'm going to make that roster, save it. Doesn't really matter if it's an official or modded one. Just make a new roster, save it as the name you want so you can refer to it in game. That's okay. If you're not concerned about losing your rosters, I would probably recommend deleting all the rosters you have and starting from scratch. It is a bit tedious to do, but then at least the rosters are going to be in a more appropriate order, because you can see mine are kind of all over the place because I've been adding on rather than doing it from scratch. But I'll show you if you were to do it from scratch. I'll do that with the draft classes so you can see what that looks like. But again, just name one for each of the rosters that you need. Go back to our desktop. And I'm just going to add the roster numbers there. So the last one I made was 56. I'm extending it down. And if I look in my folder, I should have 5 new rosters that were made. Those are the numbers, and that's how I'm keeping track of it. So that's all we need to do there. Again, this Excel file does not impact. You don't need that. I just use it for keeping track for myself. Now that we have all these unpacked, you can go ahead and delete these zip folders, unless you want to store them. I'm actually going to move these files to a different location, kind of as a backup. But if you put it somewhere where you already want to keep it, that's fine. I'm just going to move mine to a different drive that I use as a backup. So now that you have that, you open the first pack, and these are the files you're going to put in that 2K common folder over here. So you can just copy and paste those in. If it's your first time, it's probably going to take a second. If you're just updating files, it'll be quicker. The hook file, that's the one we downloaded from that hook page. We're going to replace that at the very end, but just know that it's there. I would recommend doing the packs first and then doing the hook at the very end, just to make sure you get the most up-to-date one. So now that you have the Waigu, however you pronounce it, folder, a lot of the files you drag are going to be put into there, actually. That's where the jerseys, teams, a lot of the cyber faces, those files are going to go. I'm going to wait till this file finishes copying, just in case it's going to replace any files in there. I want to make sure they've all finished copying. I'll replace any existing, and this is why I'm doing this, because usually with the packs there might be some that are just updated or new. I'll replace. That's it for the second pack. We'll do the same thing. Just select all of these files. Again, you're putting those in your Waigu folder. That's in, if you go to Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Waigu. Just waiting for that one to finish up just about. Replace. In a little bit, we're going to get to the roster files. These are all just the visuals and the like, but actual saved roster and draft class files. It's a little bit different how that setup is. I think the first one's in the 6th pack. In the 5th pack, you have a clothing folder, and you're actually going to put that in the same folder. You don't need to open it up and go into there. You're just going to copy that in there. But all those clothing files are going to end up in the clothing folder. Yes, we want to replace. Here's where we get into the draft classes and rosters. And I'll show you what I tend to do with these, but first we'll copy these in. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either just copy those files first and then go into the clothing file and copy the clothes individually like this. But if you just drag the clothing folder, if If you just drag the clothing folder into there, it'll do the same thing. You don't need to worry about doing it the way I showed you. Replace, replace. Okay. I will copy these, and I like to make a temporary roster storage folder because I'm going to rename these to move them into the Steam Apps folder, actually. And I forgot which one it was in. 6, there we go. And you actually don't need to do these for the earlier packs because Thunder Shack actually repackages them in pack number 13. So this is actually a little bit of a waste of your time. And you'll see here in a minute why that is the case. So I go into 7. And you can see these are, some of them are overlapping rosters. So you end up just replacing those files anyway. So you don't actually need to copy those. And in some cases, they're actually going to have a different naming convention. I'll show you here in a second. So those are all the same. And I want to copy, not move those because I want to keep them for reference. We'll replace. Yeah, so if you look on the left, you can see that I have 2 MyLeague, Ultimate MyLeague files for version 1. So I would recommend just not doing what I'm doing here and waiting to do the roster files to the final pack. I'm continuing to copy the clothes and the image files, replace. This you want to make sure you're doing in the order in case there's updated files. So again, I'd recommend skipping the draft class files, and you'll see here is where I was starting to notice that there's a different naming convention. So that kind of causes some issues too, because you want to grab the newest one, but unless you're keeping track of the date, it might be a little bit harder. So again, I'm showing you this just to show you kind of what files you're messing with, but I'd recommend just waiting to move the roster files until you're working on the final roster pack. If you don't, you're going to get quite confused, and you're going to have to delete some of these to make sure you know which ones are accurate versus not. These will go back up in the 2K folder. Again, just kind of replacing the hook file there. We're going to do that again at the very end as well. So we'll grab all of these and just paste those in. Here again, you can see it's kind of difficult to keep track because if they have different names, they're not going to replace themselves in this case. So that's why, again, I'd recommend you don't really have to do this. Just wait to do the roster and drafts until the final pack that has them all. But for the clothing and image files, I'd recommend replacing those just in case there's a new update. One thing I've found with these roster mods too, if one file's wrong or if it can't reference it, it tends to crash the game, particularly when it comes to MyLeague. So I recommend it's better to be safe than sorry when replacing these. So again, I would recommend just waiting to move these to a temporary location until the 13th one, because you'll see I just end up replacing, and those earlier packs had different names, so it just made it a little bit harder to keep track of. So again, just wait till the 13th one, copy those over to a temporary location. We also download the sync folder. Just go ahead and put that in the main 2K folder. Now we're actually going to replace the hook files with that most recent download, just in case there's an update there. We're pulling from the source. So just paste that in, replace, and we're good to go. We've moved all our files. So we have this temporary file location, and this is where that Excel sheet comes in handy, because we have to rename our rosters to match what 2K refers to them as. So if you look here, I would copy that roster 4, and I'm just going to rename that Ultimate My League roster version 2. So I'll start at the top, make it a little bit easier, copy paste. Okay, that's what it's referred to by 2K. So this is where the Excel sheet just kind of helps me out, makes it a little bit easier to keep track of what rosters I need to name what. And then what I like about this too is if I ever need to update a roster file, I know exactly which one I need to refer to, because I have that Excel sheet keeping track. I don't have to go into 2K, count them, and try and figure it out that way. So in this case, my roster 5 is actually 91, since those newer rosters are at the bottom. You see 86, 87. So just because you have them in an order doesn't mean that's the order 2K is referring to them as. That's why it might be easier to just start from scratch. If you're doing this from scratch, it'll be a lot easier, because in my circumstances, they're not numbered chronologically. But if you have been playing 2K, you have other rosters you don't want to lose, then you're probably going to end up doing something like this anyway. So I'd recommend using this Excel sheet to just keep your sanity, keep things in check, know what you're referring to. So let's say you're doing this from scratch, and on the download sheet, I'll give you both a roster and a draft class tab. I usually don't do as much with the draft classes, so I didn't have a tab for that. But on the download one, I'll have both, just like this. Clear both those out. And let's see, our draft classes go from 86 to 2016. So now I'm going to make the draft class files in 2K. Again, it's same when you're making the rosters. I like to put D in front of it so I know it's a draft class. But you're just doing that same thing over and over again for each of the draft classes that you need to make. Now you'll see that for me, they're not in the same order, because when 2K replaces one of the files, it doesn't move them down or up in the list. It saves that spot. So if you had a roster in spot, say 34, and you have rosters beyond that, if you delete roster 34, the next one it saves is going to put it in that 34th slot. A little confusing, but that's why the rosters have the numbering convention the way they do. So again, if this is your first time doing any rosters, great. You should have a blank list, and it'll make it a lot easier than kind of what I'm dealing with here. So if you want to start from scratch, delete all your rosters, delete all your draft classes, and then I'd recommend doing them in a certain order. So do your rosters first and then drafts, or vice versa. I'm going to speed it up here because you kind of get the gist of what I'm doing, but just to show you how long this process can take. So you can see I have that gap now where it puts some of the draft classes before and then it puts some at the end. That's because I had roster and draft class files there that I've deleted. So if yours looks like that, like mine, that's totally okay. Now that I have all those draft classes made, I'm going to update my Excel sheet. Since I had no draft classes, this will be pretty easy actually. I'll just look at the draft class numbers and do it that way. So my first draft class starts at 28. I'm going to copy this, paste it in. And the next one is 29. We'll drag these down as far as I can go. Again, I'm looking at the list to see where it's split because I know my file is split somewhere. And I can go up to 47 there. That's where it's split. And now my draft class are starting at 62. So again, if you're doing this from scratch, you shouldn't have this issue. But like most of us, you probably have rosters or different files downloaded. So this is likely a more realistic experience that you're going to have. But again, now I can keep track of this. If I need to replace a draft class, I know exactly how it's saved or a roster. So this is how I like to keep track of it. Again, you don't have to use this tool. But I've been bit in the butt a couple times by not remembering what was saved as what and having to go back and forth between 2K or not. Now this is where we actually prepare the files for storage in 2K. So like the roster files where I rename them, I'm going to rename these draft class files. So I'm going to copy the name, paste it in. We'll do 87. Copy the name 2K refers to it as, paste it in. I'm going to speed this up now, but you'll see this is all it is. Now that all the draft class and roster files have been renamed from my temporary location, this is where you replace them in that 2K remote folder. So I'm just going to paste them in here, replace my previous files if you have any in there, and we're good to go. So just to show you how this will work, we'll go into 2K. We'll look at some of these draft classes starting, we'll just look at A6. If nothing's showing up right, 03, one of my favorite classes, then in that case you might have named something wrong when you saved it there. So I'd recommend checking that out as well. Perfect. I'm excited to play around with these older ones since I haven't had them yet. I'm a huge Celtics fan, so I'll definitely be playing around with these 86 Celtics. Just to show you that everything loads right, I'll boot up a game. We'll go at 2010. One of my favorite Celtics teams. So we'll just boot up that finals match up there just to show you that everything loads right. If anything crashes, then I'd recommend downloading the file again, replacing it, because it's likely there's a file missing that it's trying to refer to. Or if you have an invisible player showing up, likely the same issue where it's trying to reference a file that's not actually there. So that's why, importing those image files in the correct order is going to be pretty important to make sure you're replacing the oldest version with a newer one or any updates, just so it's referring to them correctly. Otherwise, you might get some wonky stuff.